You're kind of important, but you're not critical to the delivery of the organisation. So understanding the critical workforce segment, and then understanding how they will change over time. So absolutely doing the analysis as it is now, but thinking, if we roll that forward 5 years, how does our critical workforce change? If we do it over 10 years, if we get to 2030, how will it look? Because that will really shape, actually, how you manage your supply. It may also change what you do with your staff internally. It may well be that you can start now by taking some of the younger generation thinking, okay, we need to retrain those into a different skill set going forward. So absolutely going through that process to understand and segment your workforce. Secondly, and rather depressingly, data. There is no getting away from it. To do true workforce planning, you have to be able to understand your current workforce and get a high degree of data accuracy on it. As I say, we do a lot of work within health, and we did a piece of work with a hospital recently, and we asked them to send us their full workforce. And we're slightly surprised when the Excel spreadsheet came through and it had 100 lines on it. And we kind of assumed, okay, they must have grouped up their workforce. Maybe we've got all the doctors together and all the physios together. No, they had a workforce of 100. There's about 11,000 people work in this hospital, but their data showed that they only really actually understood 100 of them on their system. And that, obviously an absolute extreme example. But just that challenge when you said to HR, do a download within your workforce system and tell us how many people you've got, just wildly inaccurate. At Exxon, we probably spent about 6 months in preparation for changing over to a global SAP system of cleansing data. We had a big expatriate organisation where we're sending people around the world. Because they were expats and you weren't paying them locally, you didn't really worry about what sort of data they had. So most people in Exxon spoke Eskimo, because when you put the language code down, Eskimo was 13 and it was the easiest thing to type. And there are a lot of examples around that, around ethnicity, around kind of the softer side, around the competencies of organisations. People tend not to have that information. To do true workforce planning, there is probably a data exercise to be done to enable that. And then secondly, there's a changing of the behaviour and the culture to enable that to keep going. There is a danger that you do it once, and you come around to do workforce planning, potentially a big exercise a year later, and you have to cleanse the data again. So I would urge you in terms of getting that sorted, do it once, but then change the process, the culture, the behaviour to ensure that data is maintained going forward. Thirdly, a labour supply and demand analysis. So understanding what is the workforce that you have, what is your internal supply, as we talked about. Understand your demand against your strategy. What are you going to need now and in the future? And then also understanding what the supply market looks like outside. So, okay, yes, within Kuwait, but then globally as well. If you're looking to expand into China and Vietnam and other territories, what's their resource pool? How do they work? Because I guarantee you it will be different. If you look at the Indian resource market at the moment, they have an oversupply of highly educated individuals. A lot of the call centres in India are actually staffed by graduates who are way more educated than I am. But that's because for the last 5 to 10 years they've had a real thirst for education, and they now have a highly skilled workforce, but not necessarily the roles for those people to go into. So understanding the different national resource pools as you move is going to be exceptionally important. And then understanding the strategies to identify those future gaps. So if you're going to have gaps in your market, how do you tackle that? If it's in the short term, it's a real issue. And maybe the strategy either needs to be adjusted because it can't be delivered, or there needs to be acceptance that there may be a need to buy in some of that resource. But please understand, buying in resource is very much a short-term solution. Otherwise, all you're encouraging is wage inflation. And you then build that in, and suddenly your cost of your organisation has increased because of your short-term strategy. So buying in resource should absolutely be the last point solution, but sometimes it's required. On a longer-term basis, how do you change that supply gap? How do you tackle, how do you influence supply? As talked about earlier, how do you influence the education here? to ensure that in 5 to 10 years you have the pipeline of people that you require? How do you change the image and make the oil industry something that people want to come into? But by understanding the supply gaps at different points of your organisation, you can do that. And then you can also look at internally. How do you change the skill set within your organisation? What is the development that people already within the group require to be able to deliver those skills that you need going forward? And then finally, actually embed workforce planning as part of the annual process. It is amazing how many organisations have workforce planning almost as a bolt-on. It's done in a darkened room once the finance and service bit has been done. This is what we're going to do. This is how much money you've got. Can you go and crunch the numbers to work out what the workforce looks like? Absolutely not. Going forward, that conversation has to be happening at the same time as understanding the strategy and the finance. Because as I've explained, strategies can't be delivered if the people aren't in place. And if your people strategy is to increase the salaries, increase the costs to be able to get the resource in, then suddenly the finance can't be met. So absolutely embedding the annual workforce planning process as part of the business and not making it just purely an HR function is crucial. And that's about it from us. So if there are any questions, happy to take them.
Is the resource planning, workforce planning, only a function of HR, or what is the business case?
I would say in practice, at the moment, it's probably seen as an HR function. I think to be successful going forward, parts of the organisation need to understand that it's part of their role. I think you can do that one of two ways. Make it a function of the organisation and have them do it, or alternatively go through the kind of business partner process where an HR person very strategically is linked into the business and is able to help them. Where businesses tend to do workforce planning, it's where they have a burning issue. I go back to the refinery and the turnaround. Suddenly workforce planning was a very important piece for them. On a normal day-to-day basis, it absolutely wasn't. So I think HR have a skill set and an expertise that they absolutely have to bring to bear, but I think the organisation need to understand that workforce planning is a key part for them as well. And where it's being done well, it's probably taken a good few years to get to that point. I don't think you won't get there overnight. I think the real value add for HR is, one, raising the issue, secondly, kind of bringing the problem but also being able to solve it. If you go back to where you've got the workforce gap, again, I can imagine HR turning up and saying to the business, there you go, you've got a workforce gap. And the business will kind of go, interesting, won't do much with it. I think if HR turn up and having worked this with the business and got them to it, and then says, and with that workforce gap, this is what you could do, kind of bringing the solution, it will help and it will start to embed it. But I think it has to be a partnership approach. HR shouldn't do it in isolation. Does that make sense?
طيب السلام عليكم and good morning everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. As you can see, I'm really over hardwired with these too many mics, but I guess I will enjoy it. I'm becoming too heavy. I would like to start by truly thanking, on behalf of the Society of Arabian Sources Management, I would like to thank Mr. Basim Al-Isa and his invitation to this. I need also to go back on time and thanks Salman Al-Hajjaj for getting us on board 2 months back when we met with Mr. Saad Shwayib and we briefed him about